2024, so naturally Mazda have evolved the MX-5, and that's why it looks pretty much the same. This is still the ND generation of the MX-5, or the Miata, some of you know it like that. And it's gotten some small changes to make it better to drive and also better to live with. So the notable changes are you get a new color, which is called Aero Grey Metallic, and we're not getting Platinum Quartz Metallic anymore, unfortunately. Instead, we're getting a color called Sand. We are now getting new LED daytime running lights and also LED headlights up front, which give this a bit more of a grown-up look, and I really like the look of the DRLs as well. And we're not getting the LEDs down below. Instead, they have fake vents in place of where those LEDs used to be. But let's take a look under here. Under here, you're still getting a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder motor, and the power outputs have not changed. So it's still pushing 135 kilowatts all to the rear wheels. But what has changed is the airbox design. There is another little opening that's been put into this airbox purely to make it sound better, which is something that I like quite a lot. So the ND Miata really isn't that much different from the NB Miata, which is pretty much the same size. So yes, cars are getting bigger. You can see the 911 is definitely way bigger than the old one, but here the MX-5 has hardly changed its size at all. So this MX-5 here is the GT-RS specification, meaning we get some performance goodies like these BBS wheels, Brembo front brakes, and Bilstein suspension. But something you can't see that's been upgraded for all the manual MX-5s is a new limited slip differential, which helps lock up on acceleration and helps make you more balanced on deceleration. Basically, this differential is meant to make this thing drive a bit better than the previous generation. And does it work? Well, we're about to find out. Here at the back, the best way to brag to your MX-5 mates is that you've got new taillights, which I actually think look really good. And it means that they've moved the indicators and reversing lights out of the rear bumper and moved them all up into one unit. So it looks a lot more clean at the back. But this has been a soft evolution on the outside for the ND generation MX-5. But you're still getting things like this giant antenna. There's been some small but meaningful changes in here. First of all, the seats, they got a new material in them, which is meant to help prevent you from sliding around when you're driving out on the road, or especially out on track. But we're still not getting bucket seats for the MX-5. We're getting this new 8-inch screen here, which is actually a touchscreen, and it still works as a touchscreen when you're driving, which is very not Mazda. So that's quite good. And it has connected services for things, and it even has an SOS button to call emergency services if you do get into an accident. And those connected services are meant to help you lock the car and flash the lights and check everything via an app. But yeah, that's a new thing for the MX-5 here in Australia, is that connected services, and you can download an app to connect to your MX-5 now. We also get a new instrument cluster, which has been cleaned up, so it looks way easier to read, and I really do like the more simplified look of the gauge cluster, but nothing's really changed here. We still get a giant rev counter there. We still get really nice materials on the inside. We still get body colored matched panels here on the inside of your MX-5, and they will change depending what color you get, and really it's largely the same in here, which isn't a bad thing. This is a very usable interior, but it's going to feel a bit tight if you're well over 6 foot, but at 5'11", I feel pretty cozy in here. Now sure, it looks pretty much the same as the previous generation, ND generation MX-5, but what has changed is all underneath the metal. What is kind of a fun change for 2024 is the new induction sound. So the airbox, as I mentioned, has been opened up a tiny bit. There's a new hole just to make more sound, which kind of sounds like this. And it definitely makes a difference. I definitely can hear something, but it's nothing too excessive. Steering feel and also seat feel and everything about the MX-5 just feels engaged. It feels raw, it feels pure, but it doesn't feel like something too ridiculous. You can definitely daily drive an MX-5 still, and all these little updates have just made this a little bit more livable, which is kind of a good thing. So if there's any sort of sore points you've had with the MX-5 previously, whether it's the screen, maybe it's not loud enough, those have sort of been changed. Now the GT-RS models in the MX-5 lineup get a new track mode, and to help explain that, let me talk to Karl. So I'm sitting here in the passenger seat with Karl driving, and Karl, can you please let everyone know what you do for a living?
What I do for a living? Well, right now I'm helping running a drive program for Mazda Australia, but when I'm not doing that, I'm involved in motorsport and I work in Formula One. So I'm the very fortunate guy that gets to drive the medical car in Formula One. So if you watch Formula One, you'll see me at the back of the grid starting every race, so I get to half the races of the season, driving some very nice hardware. I've got the doctors in the car with me, and we're effectively first responders on steroids. So yeah, it's an interesting role. sometimes some very quiet days, sometimes some very harrowing days. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting and unique role.
So it's fair to say that you are far more qualified than me in driving, which I will happily admit. You don't have to agree or disagree, but I will say Karl's far more qualified at driving than me.
I've done some things, and obviously a background in motorsport, raced in supercars, in open wheelers, GT racing, and yeah, I've been very lucky.
Yes, and so I'm basically a learner driver by comparison, even if I could say that. So there are important changes underneath the metal, but the person who's had the most experience with it is Karl, because Karl has had so much seat time in this car. He's going to be able to tell you the differences between this car and the old car. Even though they look a little bit the same on the outside, these changes do make a bit of difference. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some big differences, and you're right. Behind the scenes, I guess, there's a lot of preparation that takes place before we deliver these press events, and part of that with a vehicle of this nature was doing some testing. So we took this MX-5 as well as the previous generation one, the MY-23, and we did some driving, some testing, analysis, etc. And I was actually quite blown away with the changes, because you never quite know when you hear about these changes on paper. You always, you look at it and think, well, we'll see about that. Maybe those changes will be significant. Maybe they'll be minor updates, and that's why we go and do this testing. So we went to a fantastic little hill climb circuit on the way to Gippsland in Victoria called Haunted Hills. Great name. And we did a thorough day of testing there, and then we followed it up with a full test day at the Lang Lang Proving Grounds, the old Holden Proving Grounds, down on the way to Phillip Island. So 2 days of testing, and my first thoughts were, firstly, these cars are known as drivers' cars. You always feel connected to the road when you drive them. They've got such history, and the lineage of MX-5s is just, they're amazing cars no matter what. So it's hard to kind of improve on what they've already done. And the 3 key things for me, obviously there's an upgrade to the differential, the LSD that they have now, and that's probably one of the biggest changes. There's an adjustment to the steering. It seems counterintuitive, but the steering is actually lighter. Usually in a performance car, you want the feedback, you want a heavier steering, but what I love, the Mazda engineering team out of Japan have done such a beautiful job of connecting all of these different features. The steering wouldn't work that well in isolation, but it worked beautifully with the LSD. And then you've got this fantastic new performance mode, which is effectively like a sports mode that allows a little bit more yaw, a little bit more freedom without the suppression of stability control kicking in, which is perfect for those that are interested in doing track days and things like that. So that's kind of the 3 key things. The LSD itself, it's a little bit tighter in the way that it kicks in, so it's really good off the corner. When you want to get the power down, it happens like very succinctly, and it's more predictable. I think is probably the key thing for me. Off the corner, it tightens up quickly. But what a lot of people don't realize is the LSD works just as well going into a corner as well as off the corner, and I think that's where I really enjoyed driving this car on those circuits as we hit some beautiful roads here in Adelaide. It actually gives you a lot better entry stability to the corners, so you can afford to be a little bit more assertive in your performance driving, and instead of being punished for it with a bit of oversteer, it actually gives you better corner entry stability. It's more predictable, it's more consistent, it looks after the tyre better, it's just better all in all. And that's where it matches really nicely with the steering feel. Lighter steering, inevitably you're going to turn the steering wheel faster. You would have been punished in the previous generation. Now it just aligns beautifully. So
would you say lighter steering, if you go into a counter steer with a more reactive car, it's easier to sort of catch a slide, would you say as well?
Yeah, it's easier to catch a slide as well. So it's less physical, less laborious when you're driving it. You're going to fatigue less when you're if you're doing a track day or just taking the car for a really nice drive through Adelaide Hills or wherever you are in the country, a nice Sunday drive.
On that, What's your favorite feature? If you had to pick one of these and put it into the old car, what would you pick? I understand they all work together, but do you have one that you would take with you?
You know, I don't want to give a cop-out answer because that's not fair on anyone, but what I will say is on track, the performance mode, it's amazing. Previously, you have stability control on or off, nothing in between. And I find the stability control can be really overburdening at times, and it can actually burn the brakes up quite quickly. It fries the brakes because it's always applying the brake to keep the car on the straight and narrow. The performance mode just allows that freedom while still having that safety net when you do get into a slide. It still corrects it and saves you from what could be otherwise a bigger moment. On public roads, performance mode, I honestly wouldn't recommend turning any level of stability control off on any. I'm not endorsing that at all. So on public road driving, if you're going to do a nice Sunday drive, I'd say the LSD. Like, it's just the way that it drives off the corners. It gives you so much confidence, and confidence is key, I think, for enjoyment in a performance car. You never want to feel scared or apprehensive when you're driving on nice windy twisty roads, but yeah, that confidence that it gives you is just one of the greatest things they could have done.
Absolutely. And my final question is, there's a bit of a lineup here, so we've got a couple of different models to choose from. What does someone with as much track experience as you pick out of the model lineup? What's your enthusiast spec?
You have to go for the top spec GTRS, in my opinion, with the performance mode, the LSD, all the fruit in it. But then the question is, do you go for the Roadster or the non-Roadster? And I don't know. Maybe being the traditionalist that I am, for me, lightweight. You got to go lightweight. So yeah, whatever the lightest version is.
Fair enough. I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you very much for your driving. And I tell you what, if you ever get the chance to meet Karl, he's the nicest guy you've ever met.
That's too kind, mate.
He's got the best stories, so hopefully we can hear more of those at a later stage. But for now, I'm just going to enjoy being driven around by someone who's driven around on pretty much every F1 track in the world. And so that's what I really love about the 2024 MX-5, is that Mazda have done some meaningful changes here to make this thing really just better to drive, better to live with, but they haven't dramatically changed anything, and that's a good thing. They just slowly tweaked and evolved this thing, and that's what's given Porsche a lot of success with the 911, and hopefully it's successful for Mazda.